Belén Gallego, and I work for ATA Insights, and I'm one of the companies that is part of the MENA CSP Knowledge and Innovation Program by the World Bank. And I'm in that consortium, which is why I'm hosting this meeting for you today. This is a World Bank program that is looking to support the development of CSP in the MENA region. And today we're trying to get information about one of the key markets in CSP and what is going on, what are the latest updates. So we have two senior experts to discuss the development of CSP in South Africa. And I'd like to, first of all, welcome them and ask a little bit about themselves. So Terence, could you please introduce yourself briefly?
Thank you very much, Belén, and good morning, good day, and good afternoon to all of the various listeners. My name is Terence Govender, and I work for Solar Reserve as the Vice President for Development. And I'm also the Chairman of the Solar Thermal Association of Southern Africa. I'm based in Johannesburg, and I'm looking forward to sharing some insights with everyone today.
Thank you very much, Terence. He's, as he said, based in Johannesburg. I'm in Madrid. And Aditya, what about you?
Hello, everyone. My name is Aditya Thakur. I'm part of the acquisitions and project finance team in Aqua Power. I look after the financing of our projects in the sub-Saharan region, including South Africa. I have been involved in the South African market over the last 5-6 years almost, carrying out financing for our projects in South Africa, some of which include CSP projects. I'm based out of Dubai. Yeah, so that's all about me.
The Center of Operations for Aqua, definitely in Dubai. Thank you very much, Aditya. So this is what we're going to do today. We're going to study a little bit more what is going on in the market right now in South Africa. As you know, South Africa has great D&I, and I know both Aditya and Terence will say this, but I'm going to say it in advance. There was quite a lot of growth, not only in CSP, but also in renewables generally for a few years. South Africa actually managed to do a lot of things right. The competitive bids and tenders was all going really well, but all of a sudden it stopped, as it often does. Cycle goes up, cycle goes down. But now we're looking to restart the CSP technology in the South African market. And let's get a little bit of an update of what's going on. Terence, if you could prepare your presentation so that we can hear a little bit about the status of what's going on. And what Terence prepares, just to let you know, we are recording this session. We will send you the presentation so that you can have them, okay? So to send your questions, just use the Q&A box at the bottom or the chat if you like. Send them to us and we'll take them after both Terence and Aditya have spoken. Thank you very much, Terence. We can see your presentation fine. So you're welcome to start.
Thank you so much, Belén. Welcome, everyone. As I mentioned, my name is Terence Govender, and I chair the Solar Thermal Association of Southern Africa. I'll provide some contact details at the end of the presentation. So if you want more information on CSP in South Africa and what's happening in the rest of Africa, please contact us. And if you want to become a member as well, please send us an email afterwards. So the Solar Thermal Association was constituted by key CSP developers from around the world. And we set up STARSA in early 2017 with a very clear mandate. And we wanted to ensure that we promote CSP technology in Southern Africa initially and then in the rest of the world. And the association is aimed at representing all technologies and making sure, very, very important, that the CSP technology is part and parcel of the South African Integrated Resource Plan. So we've been doing a lot of work lobbying the South African government to make sure that CSP is not just seen as a renewable energy technology, but it has various different benefits in terms of its ability to store energy from our sun. We have big players that are founding members of the association, including Aqua Power, NG, Abengoa, BrightSource, Solar Reserve, Cobra. We also have various other associations that we are a part of, like the South African Renewable Energy Council. So like I mentioned, we'll put up some contact details at the end of the presentation, and please, you're more than welcome to contact us. So like you mentioned, Berlin, you know, the South African government has done a extremely good job in terms of procuring renewable energy in South Africa. And we've been through a process of 5 bid windows so far in South Africa. And on the screen, you will see the quantum of megawatts procured by government across various different technologies, PV, wind, CSP, biomass. And, you know, the procurement of these projects have been, you know, been welcomed internationally in terms of the way the process was run, etc. So if you look at the various bid windows that I have up on the screen, you would see that CSP played a key factor in all of the bid windows. They were procured under different contractual basis across those various windows, but it's a good sign that the South African government saw what CSP could offer. Going across those bid windows, you know, projects that were procured in bid window 1 was completely procured differently in bid window 3.5. Government saw the benefits of storage and incentivized the project companies and the IPPs to generate power more during the peaking times rather than just generating power as and when you know, the sun shines. So that's very good news for the South African market. 600 megawatts has been procured to date. So the government procures these projects on a very strict basis. The PPAs are given up front, they're non-negotiable. The implementation agreement is non-negotiable. There's a lot of investment that goes into these projects up front, you know, from the IPPs. And if you look at the way the procurement is done, you have to have a lot of your permitting, in fact, all of your permitting done up front, land security, you know, confirmation for your debt and your equity, which is done slightly different in other parts of the world. So, you know, IPPs in the CSP sector spend a lot of upfront money in terms of developing. You know, the development of each project can easily go up to 20 million rand before you even bid a project. But this is good. You know, we know what government expects from us, so we go out and we develop these projects to meet the procurement requirements. The projects are also evaluated, you know, 70% on price and 30% on job creation and social, economic, and local content benefits. But having that 70% weighting in terms of price, you know, makes us want to bid the cheapest projects in the market at that time, based on how the procurement rules are and how the PPAs are structured, etc. So, you know, the CSP IPPs don't bid projects on the basis that you know, we will come to government with any tariff. We incentivize to compete in this market. So the good news is that, you know, like I said, there's 600 megawatts of renewables coming from CSP specifically. You know, 10 years ago, South Africa, if it had 1 megawatt of renewables from any source installed in operation, that was quite a high number. So it's pleasantly surprising. You know, we have approximately 6,000 megawatts procured in South Africa from renewable energy technologies, and 10% of that coming from CSP technology. So, you know, we have mostly trough technologies that have been awarded. We have a steam tower that's been awarded. A lot of these projects have direct and indirect storage as well. Now, those projects in green are fully operational, and the ones in orange are late stage financial close or you know, late stage commissioning. So if you look at the size, you know, they typically 100 or 50 megawatt projects. Some of them have steam accumulator storage, 2.5 hours. The Bokpoort project, which you know, we'll hear later on, has about 9 hours of storage. And all of these projects are fully operational, delivering power onto the grid. And I'm happy to say, you know, 2 weeks ago, Eskom was a bit challenged with their ability to supply power on the grid. And between wind and CSP, you know, they were able to fill that gap. So there was no load shedding in the country about 2 weeks ago. So CSP played a key role in avoiding blackouts in the country. Off this list, you know, we have the Redstone CSP project, which signed its PPA on the 4th of April this year. and the team, the key sponsors on that project is ACWA Power and Solar Reserve. And, they are full steam ahead in terms of reaching financial close shortly. So it's very exciting times for all of these projects. Globally, we're seeing CSP take on a different look and feel. China is running a 1 gigawatt pilot program. That's very good news for CSP. But there's over 6,000 megawatts in operation, over 3,500 megawatts in construction, and this 25,000 megawatts in planned or in development stages is increasing every single day. So there's a lot, a lot of investment going into these projects. Now, specifically in South Africa, of the 6,000 megawatts that have been procured so far, there's been some limitations in terms of why CSP, only contributes to 10% of that. The projects are capped at 100 megawatts, which is not really good for a steam turbine generator based technology. Aditya will share later, places like in Diwa, etc. There was 900 megawatts of procurement in one go, and it's now been increased to 950 megawatts. There's no compensation for generation between 10 p.m. and 5 p.m. Only one peak at this stage is being compensated for in terms of an incentive to generate during non-sunlight hours. The PPA terms are fixed at 20 years. So these are some of the factors, that's kind of making large-scale CSP implementation in South Africa easy. So these are some of the points that STARSA is lobbying with government, and hopefully, we'll be able to see a lot more CSP being procured in the country. So I put up this slide, it's my last slide. I put this up so we can get into the conversation. Eskom still shows a slide where they still have 2 peaks, even though those peaks are being decreased, but they have 2 definite peaks, and they want to be able to control, the amount of power being generated by, let's say renewable energy sources, be it intermittent or in the case of CSP, more constant generation. But, CSP offers a lot more benefits than just being able to receive energy from the sun and store it. CSP can play in the baseload market. So, we can complement coal projects. We can design the plants to play in the peaker and the mid-merit. The plant is fully dispatchable. The plant is dry cooled, and it's able to follow Eskom's generation profile. So there's other critical services, auxiliary services that CSP technology can play for in the South African market. So there's good news. We have the 600 megawatts that has been procured. 100 megawatts of that is in late stage financial close, and the rest are pretty much in operation at this stage. So hopefully the lessons learned from that project, will help government see the benefits of these projects, the ability to generate after the sun is set on very constant generation profiles, etc. So that's a very quick snapshot for the CSP in the South African market. So these are our details. So if anyone wants to get a hold of STARSA, drop myself or Alicia an email, and we're happy to accommodate you. Thanks, Billy.
Thank you very much, Terence. If you can stop sharing your screen, then we're going to ask Aditya as well to share his screen. We already have a question. This question is sure to be complicated to answer, but we will get there thereafter to the best of our ability. Aditya, when you can, if you can start sharing. Yeah, I don't think there is going to be easy questions. At the end of the day, we do have a number of challenges right now in South Africa, right? And it's a shame to see them when it's such a great country in terms of resource. But if things were ideal, then it'd be really easy. Right, okay, you ready then?
Absolutely.
Perfect, we can see the presentation, so you go for it. Don't forget, guys, send the questions, use the Q&A answer, more the merrier. Thank you.
Thanks. Hello, everyone. I introduced myself earlier. I'm Aditya Thakur, part of the acquisitions and project finance team in ACWA Power. My presentation or the slides that I'm going to present today are more towards the financing aspects of CSP projects in South Africa. What I'm going to talk about is largely based on the experience that I have gathered over the last 5-6 years of working on CSP projects in South Africa and working with the local and international banks and institutions. So let me get straight into it. Starting with the renewable energy program itself, I think Terence captured it very well in his slides. There has been almost 6,300 megawatts of renewable energy that has been procured in South Africa over the last 6 or 7 years since 2011 when this program was initiated. Over the 5 bid rounds, we've already seen that 600 megawatts of CSP capacity has been procured. Most of it has been parabolic trough. Some of it is steam tower, and now we're working together with Solar Reserve in terms of developing a molten salt tower project, which is the Redstone CSP project. But just talking about the achievements of the renewable energy program, I think it's very important to sort of appreciate what this program has delivered over the last 5-6 years, right? And not just the 6,000 megawatts that we sort of all hear as the headline number, but I think what is very important to realize is the improvement in the tariffs that these projects have delivered over the last 3-4 rounds. Specifically in relation to PV and wind projects, there have been massive savings in the tariffs that are delivered by these projects. On top of it, you also see huge investments having been made. There are different numbers out there, but I think the official estimate is something of the order of 200 billion rand of investments across these 90 odd projects that have been sort of closed over the last 6 years. There has been massive spending on the social and economic development programs as part of these projects, and obviously these projects have also led to a significant or a meaningful employment generation for the local population. So there are sort of broader social, let's say, benefits that this entire program has generated on top of adding renewable energy capacity into the South African grid. Okay, now specifically talking about CSP, my apologies if some of this stuff seems very basic, but it's important for us to realize, specifically when later on we'll talk about the financing challenges, it's important for us to realize what are these different CSP technologies, and why do we have challenges with certain few technologies and not with others. So fundamentally speaking, CSP is nothing but a technology which involves concentrating solar power, converting it into thermal energy, and then using that thermal energy to produce electricity. There has been almost 5,500 or 6,000 megawatts of CSP capacity installed worldwide, but most of it is parabolic trough. Parabolic trough has been sort of, in the market over the last 30 odd years or so. It has proven to be bankable. The technology seems to have been understood by the investor community, by the lender community very well. The challenges, in projects involving parabolic trough technology seem to have been appreciated and understood. And that's why you see a lot more comfort when lenders or investors look at projects based on parabolic trough. The other technology which is gaining ground in the CSP market is the steam central receiver. It's essentially heliostats concentrating the solar energy on top of a tower, at which sits a receiver which produces steam directly at the top of the tower, and then you use that steam to produce power by conventional methods. It hasn't been as broadly and as widely deployed as parabolic trough, But still, there have been a few utility scale projects in US, in South Africa. Also, we spoke about the key project, the 50 megawatt key project as part of round one, which is a steam tower project. The latest sort of technology which is gaining commercial ground in the CSP market is the molten salt central tower. There are utility scale projects which are now being done or which have been done in US, Spain, Morocco. The technology essentially involves, again, concentrating solar energy on top of a tower where sits a receiver, which then converts that solar energy into, or transfers that solar energy into molten salt, and then subsequently gets used for production of electricity. Specifically talking about South Africa, we've seen 50 megawatts of steam tower projects being done, 450 megawatts of parabolic trough, and 100 megawatt of molten salt tower, which is the Redstone project, currently under development and should hopefully get to financial close very soon. I think the point that I'm trying to make here through this slide is that parabolic trough enjoys widespread acceptance within the banking or the lender community, within the investor community. It's a technology which has been sort of in the market for quite some time, and there is a fair degree of comfort that investors have when it comes to parabolic trough. We do have some further work to be done in terms of getting lenders, banks, investors comfortable on some of the MSCR-based projects or with some of the steam tower-based projects. And we'll come to some of these challenges, in just a bit. Okay, before I get into the details of what are the challenges that we face when we try and get a CSP project to financial close in South Africa, I think it's also probably worthwhile just painting a good background picture of what the financing market in South Africa actually looks like. So if you're talking about debt financing in South Africa, you would see, 5 large commercial banks. These commercial banks typically take the lead when it comes to financing or structuring of these transactions. They're also supported and complemented in a number of these transactions by the institutional lenders. And when I say institutional, I mean South African institutional lenders like IDC, DBSA, PIC. And then, of course, there is a big commercial asset management companies or pension fund market out there, which essentially, offloads a lot of this debt investments from the books of these commercial lenders. You also see development finance institutions, the likes of IFC, AFDB, etc., participating, but again, in a limited way, and we'll come to that also in just a bit. We haven't seen foreign banks playing a significant or a meaningful role so far in the renewable energy program. But that's largely because of the structure of the program itself. It does not allow foreign currency debt, or it kind of discourages foreign currency debt to be employed in these projects. However, that doesn't seem to have stopped the local banks or institutions from stepping up and providing the liquidity that has been required for these projects. As you can see, almost 150 billion rand of debt financing has been provided by these commercial banks and institutional lenders, which is a significant number. And I think, as I mentioned earlier, typically it's the commercial banks who take the lead in terms of structuring the transactions and then, essentially distributing that debt to pension funds, asset management companies, and the like. On the equity side, what you would typically see in projects like these is that there would be an anchor developer or an investor who essentially develops the project, who sponsors the project, and who also ultimately takes up, an equity position in these projects. Along with those sort of, sponsor group, you also have institutional investors, coming in and providing equity into the project. And now I'm talking of the likes of PIC, Old Mutual, etc. And then because of the requirements from the RFP or from the the bid requirements themselves, we need to have BEE shareholders, local Black shareholders as part of the equity in these projects. So for the funding of equity of those projects, you typically have facilities available from, again, the likes of IDC, PIC, etc. So that's just to paint an overall picture of what the landscape looks like when it comes to financing of projects in South Africa. Now we'll specifically talk about, CSP projects and what are the challenges that we have seen, taking our CSP projects through the financing process. So firstly, I think it's important to realize that CSP technology on a relative basis is still considered a bit riskier than the other mainstream technologies. And when I say mainstream technology, I basically mean PVs, wind, etc. Having said that, within the CSP sort of technology space, there is a large amount of comfort that people derive from, let's say, parabolic trough technology, which, as I mentioned earlier, has been in the market for quite some time. But for other sort of, let's say, relatively newer technologies like steam tower or molten salt tower, you do have lots of challenges on the financing front. So let's just talk about those sort of issues that we face. First and foremost is just the liquidity challenge. Getting sufficient number of lenders or investors who are interested in terms of financing these projects. These projects typically involve a large outlay of capital expenditure. Just a thumb rule is a 1 megawatt CSP project would be 8 or 10 times the capital cost of a PV project. So when you're talking about a 100 megawatt CSP project, we necessarily need to sort of put together a large group of financing institutions or banks. Because the capital requirements are huge. Now, finding that sort of number of banks or institutions who are also comfortable on the technology side becomes a challenge. The second issue here is, as I said earlier, it's generally the commercial banks who take the lead in terms of structuring the transactions, or in terms of putting the structure of the transaction together. Now, if you don't have commercial banks comfortable with the technology, you essentially lose access to the wider pool of investors, like pension funds, like asset management companies, etc. So just because of the technology part and the fact that some of these banks, do consider this technology to be slightly challenging, we end up losing, a lot of liquidity which would otherwise have been available to such projects. And then you get down to the specific challenges around, let's say, funding terms. A CSP project would typically, have lower gearing. It would have to pay higher interest rates. You would typically see shorter tenors of debt. Lenders would also insist on higher contingencies as part of the financing structure. So all of this actually goes on to make CSP projects or the tariffs slightly more uncompetitive. Now, I'm not saying that CSP projects are uncompetitive. All I'm saying is, on a relative basis, the terms that a financing term that a PV project or a wind project can enjoy are much more aggressive than what you can find, in the case of CSP projects. And had those terms been the same, CSP projects would have become a lot more competitive. I think Terence probably made that point about our Dubai CSP project, which ACWA Power is currently developing. And one of the things that we realized when we looked at a project, for example, in South Africa versus a project here, is the impact that the debt financing terms can make on the tariff. The conclusion that we came to was that almost 20 to 25% of the tariff is essentially just the financing terms, the interest rate or the debt tenor. And if we can optimize those terms, or if we can bring them in line with what we're seeing, for example, with PV projects or wind projects, it immediately knocks off 20 to 25% off the tariff, right? So that's also another challenge that, we, the developers of CSP projects in South Africa face, that the terms are not as sort of market-based as, let's say, lenders are comfortable offering to other technologies. And then, when you get down to documentation or the structure of the transaction itself, again, you would find very conservative positions being sort of proposed by the lenders or the investors. Sponsors are typically prohibited from distributing, early on in the projects, or even subsequently. There are lots of sort of strict covenants which are applied on distributions. The coverage ratios typically are very high. There is a lot of focus on prepayment of debt if the plant isn't performing very well. And then last but not the least, lenders typically put a lot of effort in terms of doing the due diligence on the projects. So they would typically look at the EPC contractor, the experience of those contractors, the financial strength of those contractors. Same with O&M, has the O&M contractor done similar project before? What is the capability, how, the terms of the O&M contract, etc. And all of this is not just a debt financing issue. It is also an equity financing issue. Financing or equity financing of a CSP project, again, is relatively much more challenging than, say, a PV project or a wind project. You would not have as many investors, who are willing to come and participate in the financing. And, in cases where you do have those investors, the return thresholds are that much higher. All of this, at the end of the day, impacts the economic viability of the projects, the tariff that the projects can offer. And if we can surpass these challenges, we can come over these challenges, it will help us make CSP projects that much more competitive, and the value proposition of CSP projects will become that much more attractive in a market like South Africa. All right. I thought I'll also highlight a few sort of challenges that I see, specifically, again, coming from CSP perspective. What are the challenges that I see going forward when I talk about, financing? I think the biggest challenge that we foresee is around policy uncertainty, right? What we as investors and, having spoken to lenders and other sort of debt financiers, the key thing is the government needs to stand firmly behind this technology. The policy needs to be very clear in terms of the fact that the government is supportive of CSP technology going forward. And I think on that, there have been some mixed signals in the past. I'm sure the people who have reviewed the IRP or the draft IRP recently, they would have seen that there is not as much focus on the CSP technology as there was, at least over the last 4 or 5 years. And then, just broadly talking about policy, we've seen significant delays in the renewable energy program. It's not just a CSP issue, it's also a wider renewable energy program issue. But, these things cast a little bit of a shadow in terms of the, let's say, how attractive these projects sound to investors or to debt financiers. I've mentioned, I briefly touched upon liquidity earlier, and the fact that so far liquidity in South African market has not been a challenge. But there are other programs which are currently being run by the South African government, the base load program or the gas to power program. Now, to the extent those programs pick up, they are likely to suck up a lot of liquidity from the market. What that means is, for CSP projects and other capital intensive projects like CSP, funding options are going to get limited. Liquidity is going to become a bit of a problem. Solution to that problem is to open up the structure a little bit to allow international banks and lenders to come and participate. That would, of course, have implications in terms of foreign currency and who bears the risk in terms of foreign currency. But that's probably the direction which government needs to start sort of thinking. Okay, these are the two issues that I see which lie more on the government space, which the government needs to sort of think about. But then there are also things that we as developers need to think about, right? If we want to essentially, keep pushing or keep encouraging adoption of CSP technology in the South African market. So first and foremost are just performance of these plants. The better the performance of under construction or operating CSP projects, the better the prospects of future CSP projects getting or being able to obtain financing on competitive terms. Some of the issues that we currently see in financing are also stemming from the fact that lenders or financiers have not had a very good experience, in their previous sort of investments. So that part needs to be addressed. Developers need to be cognizant of the fact that, it's at the end of the day, if they do not deliver on their projects, they will suffer in terms of their future pipeline of projects. And that pipeline of projects will either not get any financing, or it will get financing at much more onerous terms. And lastly, I think it's an important point that the entire sort of CSP industry needs to sort of think about and try and get their heads around, is about the viability of the tariffs. It remains, it remains a big question mark in the minds of people who invest in these projects. Do we believe that the tariffs of these projects are viable over the long term? The tariffs of these projects are definitely higher, and that's largely a function of the capex of these projects. But we need to think about creative ways in terms of bringing the tariffs down, so as to ensure that the projects which have been built, developed, and the projects which will come up in future remain viable over the long term. So these are the two things which I thought I'll highlight, which I see more, under the control of developers or IPPs like ourselves, if we want to keep sort of, encouraging, as I said, the adoption of CSP technology in South Africa. I guess that's pretty much it. Any questions, please feel free to, drop in the Q&A box, and we'll be happy to answer.
Thank you very much, Aditya. I'm going to ask you first, if you may, to just switch off your presentation so that we can see both of you larger. We have a few questions, so I'm going to start with those. I've also made some notes for some things that I'd like to ask. First, I'm going to ask one that is very specific, and it's to you, Aditya. You had on one of your points was the fact that we needed to see how the projects perform in order for the banks to gain a little bit of trust in the technology. And someone here is asking, Eric is actually asking, Aditya, are there any existing performance issues that are hindering growth? So are there currently performance issues that you feel are hindering the growth of CSP? And then Terence, you can also add if you'd like to this. So do you want to start, Aditya?
Yeah, sure. So, you see, firstly, the fact that the MSCR technology or the steam tower technology is a relatively new entrant, by default would mean that you will have some learning challenges, right? You will have some ramp-up issues. However, on top of it, I think we all are aware that some of the earlier projects in South Africa I'm specifically talking about CSP, had some performance issues. Now, what that does is the lenders who were involved in those projects then take a slightly more conservative view when they are doing, other projects employing similar technologies. And right now, working on the financing of our Redstone project, I am actually seeing some of that sort of playing out in the discussions that I am having with my own lenders. So it may not as much hinder the growth of the CSP industry per se, but it would definitely, for example, have an impact on what we can do when it comes to financing, what we can do in terms of making it broadly more attractive to the investor community.
Terence, would you like to add anything, or are you happy?
No, I think Aditya covered the key points in terms of performance of these projects. Just remember also that in South Africa, the procurement of CSP projects has been done slightly different. It allowed the technologies to generate at a certain window period as well, So there's a little bit of ingenuity and innovation that had to go into the designs of these projects, which is slightly different from what we know from the past. So yes, there are certain challenges, but I think it's not surmountable. And the IPPs are dealing with these projects during their commissioning phases and they test periods. They normally have a 1 or 3 year window period in which they will test the various aspects of these projects. But I think with the amount of projects that we have implemented both in South Africa, north of Africa as well, the most CSPs being commissioned, every project that's being bid or developed now is actually using lessons learned from all of these other projects. If you look at Redstone, for instance, Redstone has taken lessons from Crescent Dunes, which is a project in the US by Solar Reserve, Noor 3, which is the CSP project by AquaPower, the Sener project, etc. So lessons keep getting pushed down to all of these technologies going forward. So it is something that it's ongoing improvement, and I think it's good for the industry.
Right, guys, I have to put you through your paces now. Here, there is a question that is quite uncomfortable, but we have to go for it. How do you see Eskom's decision to cancel its CSP projects and turn to investment in storage program? So this is a little bit of a hot potato. Terence, first going to you.
It's an interesting question. I typed a response and I didn't press send. So, the whole Eskom program, started back in 2003 when Eskom initially was looking for funding for Medupi. And on the back of World Bank funding, there was some criteria that Eskom would look at renewables plant. And the two plants that they looked at was the Sarah Wind Farm and the CSP project. But I think what the curveball in all of this was the IPP procurement program in South Africa, where companies like Aqua in the Bokport project, Ebengoa in all of their projects, NG in their projects, Cobra in their projects, what they proved is that if you do these projects on a competitive bid process, project finance, you could do it a lot more cheaper than Eskom trying to reinvent the wheel. So they kind of said, let the private sector play in that space. And Eskom recently got approval to have a look at battery storage, etc., which is a good thing. If you look at the way the markets in South Africa are going from rooftop to embedded generation, etc., the next big wave is going to be battery technology. We know that costs are coming down quite drastically. So it's probably a good move for Eskom. The private sector, and I say this very cautiously, but the private sector understands project finance and how to close these projects within a certain period, based on all the risks that Aditya spoke about. And beyond that, we get tied up into contracts like our PPAs and our IAs, which we can't renege on, and there's no slippage on that. So yes, there's a place for Eskom to play, there's a place for us to play. So I don't read much into it. Eskom knows traditional coal plants. They understand the nuclear plant. Renewables is a new technology, whether it's intermittent generation or constant generation. So they'll come up the learning curve. And like Aditya mentioned before, the value of CSP has been seen and will be seen going forward in South Africa. And I see Eskom playing a big role in that going forward.
Terence, I did not think you could come out better from replying to the question, but there you go. You've done a great job. Aditya, I didn't know if you want to add anything, or you prefer, for the hot potato to escape you altogether?
No. Look, this, to be honest with you, this is something that has come up in other fora earlier as well. But I think Terence is spot on. The motivation which was there earlier for Eskom to do the CSP project on the back of the World Bank funding probably is no longer there now, given that private sector has indeed demonstrated CSP projects viability in South Africa. So some of that, I personally think that the move away from CSP is not as much because Eskom doesn't believe in CSP. It's just the fact that CSP has already been proven in South Africa, and Eskom doesn't need to sort of repeat that. So that's how I see this.
Okay, well, if they learning from that got and started doing just IPPs everywhere, I'm sure the private sector will be much happier. So I have one more question here, and then I have several of my own. Some of them I'm going to put you through your paces. The one here from Ian says, "Hi Aditya, when will the Redstone financial close be reached, and when do you expect the procurement program for the heliostats to begin?" But heliostats is very specific, so maybe you can tell us milestones, general milestones that we should know about.
Sorry, Belen, my internet connection just sort of broke for a second there.
Okay, no worries. I'll read it again.
Can you repeat the question?
Sure. The question was about the milestones for the Redstone project, and I don't know whether actually you or Terence would be better off to reply to this, but it says, when will the financial close be reached, and when do you expect the procurement program to begin, and what are the milestones of the project more generally?
Okay, so I obviously cannot go into a lot of details here, but I'll try and sort of give you an overall picture of how the project sort of timetable is going to look. We are intending to achieve financial close on the project in the coming few weeks. Once financial close is indeed achieved, the construction on the project can immediately begin. And that would mean that, from that point onwards, the procurement program, et cetera, will start. The overall timetable for the project is around 2.5 years from the beginning of construction. So we're very hopeful that towards the middle of 2021, we will start feeding electrons into the grid. And so that's how I see the overall sort of timetable of the project.
So NTPC, you expect it at the end of this year?
Again, I can't be very specific, but as I said, it is going to be in the next few weeks.
Don't knock me for trying. Okay. I have a bit of a question. I feel in a way that the South African experience, if you like, with CSP was a lot better than what we had here in Spain. We made the first sort of bunch of mistakes, then you came after and you made a lot less mistakes, but still some. And there is a situation now, especially upon mentioning, the DIBA project, as well as you could also mention the NOR projects in Morocco. I don't really want to get into a lot of detail about, price analysis, but what I know is one thing, and is that the price in South Africa should be a lot lower. So my question is a little bit like free for you to also talk and brainstorm a bit, but I wonder how low could the costs be pushed in South Africa, considering the Chinese option coming in, because we haven't had that in South Africa so far, really. Maybe in the PV side, maybe on the wind side, but certainly not in CSP. So we're living in a brave new world for CSP now, where the prices are pushed down mainly by the Chinese developers. So what do you think, guys? If we were to do this again now on a DIGWA-style project, is it possible? What would this Chinese side mean, and what would the cost be like? There you go. Who wants to take it? Terence.
Okay, so it's a good question, and I think this will answer the question raised by Sylvia as well. So I think it's
going to continue with that, but you feel free to bring it in as well, because obviously local context and the Black empowerment issues, they weigh in.
Yeah, correct. So, if you look at the way CSP was procured in South Africa since round one, there's been a drastic decrease in the tariff. And during the expedited round, when there was a call for projects, there were, the capacity of the projects were increased to 150 megawatts from the previous 100 megawatt cap. We saw a further drastic decrease in tariffs as well. But I think we must also be very careful in terms of comparing apples with apples and apples with pears, because, like this question raised by Sylvia, is what is the South African government procuring? Yes, they are procuring electrons, which is the kilowatt hour, okay? But at the same time, in terms of the way projects are procured in South Africa, it's procuring commitments for social benefits in terms of your social, economic development, your enterprise development. It has constraints in terms of how much of money should be spent in local currency, in terms of local content. Aditya mentioned this before. It has certain criteria to be met in terms of equity, in terms of your management structure, etc. So the procurement of CSP in South Africa is done on trying to achieve different aspects of our national development plan. So it's not the cheapest electron that you can get from CSP in South Africa. So you got to look at that basket approach as well, which is good in a way, because South Africa is a developing country and you should ensure that there's support for job creation, industrialization, and also, the improvement in terms of skills and skills development in different sectors. So that's very, very important. But yes, we have seen drastic reductions in tariff from round 1 to round 2. We've even seen the program change a little bit, where the initial projects were not structured or incentivized to generate power for the peak period in South Africa, which is typically your 5 to 8 p.m., in the afternoon, and in the mornings, your 5 a.m.s to typically 9 a.m. So if you look at all of that, there's massive room to decrease tariffs in the country. If you look at it purely on an electron basis, yes, we could then present much lower tariffs to government at the expense of all of the other benefits. With the massive program in, DEWA, the massive programs coming out in China, you quite correctly said, there's a lot of experience now coming from China, which was not there a few years ago. Previously, if you wanted to do a CSP project, you would go to Spain, because that's where all of the experience came from. Or you would go to the US, where the early experience came from, in the SEGS projects and in the Solar 1 and Solar 2 projects. Now we're seeing a lot more experience from the rest of the world. And as much as there's challenges in understanding CSP, we also see people becoming more comfortable with the technology, more providers for heliostat. Based on our operational profile, our cycling of our steam turbines, the big steam turbine companies are coming to the table with a lot more, let's say, reduction in prices. So there's benefit coming from the whole life cycle cost of the projects. So yes, there's definite, a lot more room for improvement in these tariffs.
I still haven't heard the number though, Terence, a number. This is what I was looking for.
Competitive bid process, and I think, and again, when you bid these projects, Billy, you actually commit to government on these various levels. How much of jobs you're going to create? What is your, what is your social development? But the tariffs are coming down, and again, it depends how they incentivize you over the peak period. But yeah,
I'm going to say less than 7.3. Yes, no.
We've seen that already.
I know we've seen that already. So the question is, could we get that, considering everything in South Africa today?
We've seen that in the Solar Reserve project in Australia, and let me not talk to Aditya, and he'll share what.
6.1 and then 4. Yeah, no, I am aware of that, but this is why I'm asking for South Africa specifically. What can we see?
I think the numbers are achievable. The numbers you are throwing out there are achievable, subject to certain procurement, constraints.
What about 4? You guys are getting a real commitment here from Solar Reserve. And I'm going with you now, Aditya. I don't think that you're going to go unscathed. So, you guys have crunched the numbers. I know it's a little bit like, I actually learned 2 days ago that this is a bit of a blended tariff and, like the complexities of that particular tariff. But what could be done in South Africa, considering everything that has been learned. I think, if anything, Aqua right now is really at the forefront of the industry.
Yeah, look, Belen, as much as I would have loved to give you a number, unfortunately, the problem is a lot of it depends upon just the structure of the project. And I'm being very sort of upfront and direct here with you. It depends upon the site. It depends upon, obviously, your sourcing, your EPC, where is it coming from? That's a big factor. But then let's not forget about financing. Let's not forget about, your PPA. Let's not forget about your tariff structure. And I probably alluded to this earlier in the middle of my slides. We have done an analysis between, what are we doing in South Africa versus what we have done in the Dubai project when it comes to tariffs. And we kind of broke it down into big factors. And we realized that something like financing makes a massive 20% difference in tariffs. Yeah. Something like PPA tenor, for example, and a lot of people may not think about a 35-year PPA being a big advantage, but in Dubai, they're doing 35-year PPAs. The moment you sort of go to that kind of structure, you realize that a lot of equity players can easily make their returns in the last 15 years. You don't need to sort of, squeeze your capital cost in the 20 years. All of this puts a huge impact, right? You can provide tax incentives, to renewable energy projects. Why not? Yeah. There are lots of other things that can be done in projects like these, which can help bring the tariffs down. EPC, I agree, is a big factor. The Chinese pilot program will definitely will improve or develop the entire supply chain. So we're hoping that once that program picks up, we will start seeing the benefits in the projects that we are developing. But if you're looking for a number right now, I'm sorry, it's not your lucky day.
Five? I'm just trying to see, at the end of the day, you guys, I know it's not easy, but if we don't put the numbers out there and the right people don't start hearing them and believing that this is an actual possibility, if we're waiting for everybody to come with a silver platter, it's a little bit harder, So it is important to be thinking along those lines, along what could be done. And I think Solar Reserve in that end has done a lot of work in Chile and Australia, to try and get people to change their frame of mind, the frame of mind.
I'll tell you, my personal view on this is, if we were to start structuring our projects along international lines, there is definitely a possibility of single-digit tariffs. And when I say single-digit, I mean US cents. That is definitely possible in South Africa. From where we are today, I don't know.
I agree with what Aditya is saying as well. And coming back from one of the points he touched on earlier in terms of policy certainty, 6,000 megawatt renewables, only 600 for CSP, doesn't help the cause, right? So there has to be certainty in terms of the pipeline, in terms of how these projects and how much will be procured going forward, so that incentivize, local industrialization and local support, etc. So there's this whole basket of issues that play into driving down the tariff. So, single digits, yes, very possible, but subject to.
No, I agree. That is not as straightforward as other countries either. So there's a comment here from Nandu that says, that says, most important is that CSP must break the 1 rand per kilowatt hour to at least offset gas turbines. My thoughts. So it needs to be cheaper. I'll just leave it out there. I don't know. Okay, go on, Aditya. We don't have a lot of time, so please make it brief. Because
no, very quickly. I think I see where Nandu is coming from. I think the challenge with gas, going forward would be around, just the availability of gas, the price of, the commodity price risk that people would be taking, the foreign currency risk that people would be taking as part of those whole gas-based procurement. But okay, we're not going to talk about the merits or, a lack of merits of the program. I think CSP has a value proposition even when you compare it to gas-based projects. And that value proposition is, once you build those projects, you don't have to worry about, oil prices going from X to Y, or,
the energy risk side.
wherever. Yeah.
Plus, it's your own energy. You're not, you know, like the balance of payments doesn't get knocked on your also your economy. So yeah, we do know those things. Unfortunately, we've gone an hour, believe it or not. So we need to leave it there. I had 2 more comments / questions that I wanted to throw at you, but we're not going to have the time today, unfortunately. One was the issue of Southern Africa. You know, South Africa is not the only country. I think there is a lot that has been learned in South Africa that can be taken to nearby countries. The DNI is quite good there as well. And in the past, Paddy Padmanathan, the CEO of Aqua, has said that countries like Botswana could get really low tariffs, you know, around the 5 cents. So this was something he was saying. Of course, this probably wouldn't include the local content side of things because it does make things a little bit more expensive. And you're right, when you have local content, then there is the whole thing of what happens to these people thereafter. But as a region, there is a lot of opportunity for CSP. And I also wanted to mention one more thing is the fact of the desalination and all of the industrial processes. Yeah. Huge issue. We've seen a lot of, especially mining companies, green out their supply chain. For reasons, CSR reasons, but most importantly because the big companies are telling them we won't buy unless you green out. So I think there is a little bit of an opportunity there too. Unfortunately, we don't have time to go into a lot more depth about it, but I thank you very much for your time and for sharing your expertise with us. So Terence, thank you very much. Aditya, thank you very much. And thank you very much for everybody who has been with us today. And I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next one. So thank you and see you next time. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.